And now for something completely different.
Now, before this video really begins, I'd like to note that this is primarily being made for myself, to share my current ideas and beliefs aloud, so in 10 or 20 years down the line, I can come back, watch this video, and see what's changed. I'm confident that some of my opinions will have stayed the same, while others might have changed, or what seems more likely to me, evolve. Now, a good place to begin talking about why history matters is exactly what is history, what's included in the word. If you Google history definition, it comes up with two relatively simple results. The first definition it provides is the study of past events, particularly in human affairs. At first glance, this appears to be a pretty good definition. When most people think about history, they think about ancient wars and politics and how they mix together to bring about some of the most famous events in human history. Or perhaps people will think about more modern events that have had a direct impact on them. A war, economic crisis, COVID certainly going down in the history books, for instance. It's completely reasonable to think about these things first. Most people really interested in the subject of history tend to focus on the exciting battles and historic events that have shaped our modern world. The second definition that appears when you look up history, however, I believe is more accurate. It reads, the whole series of past events connected with someone or something. Everything a person has ever done could be considered a part of history. Now, of course, much of the past is forgotten over time. Even individuals can't remember exactly what they were doing in any particular week of their lives. However, every industry, people, culture, religion, location, thought, or idea, told or untold, is part of history. The word history is a deceptively simple word. It has its own story originating all the way back to ancient Greek. For the purpose of this video, however, I'm sure you get the idea by this point. History encompasses an almost unimaginable number of things, quite literally the story of the world and how we've reached the point we are at today. Now, why does it matter? One of the most obvious answers for many is that we learn from the past, both the horrible mistakes and great successes. That's absolutely true. Every aspect of our life is affected by the past. Even if people fail to heed the hard-earned lessons of the past, it still influences our actions of today. History builds upon itself up to the present, and it will continue to build on itself up into the future. So the question's answered. I don't think so. Yes, we learn from the past, but with the history of humans and of the earth itself going on so far back, why do we need to know ancient history, or even learn something from like a few hundred years ago, the Napoleonic Wars, for instance? For most people, learning from mostly recent history is enough to get them through their daily lives. There are exceptions, of course, such as learning about your own country's history or your cultural history. But does someone in a continent away need to learn about the history of another continent hundreds of years ago? Yes and no. If you're looking for something to learn, there's always something more to be gained. But people don't need to know everything. In fact, it's impossible to know everything. For the vast majority, learning a little bit of history is enough. For a small group, however, that needs to know more, either because it's part of their job or learning is part of their passion, there is something to be gained. Nothing lasts forever, and the odds are, over a long enough period of time, everything we'll ever have done will be forgotten. In the meantime, though, we can look back and both benefit and enjoy learning about the past. Because the simple fact is, the past is just a very long, sometimes poorly written, but always very complex story. As someone who loves to read a good story, history is a never-ending source of enjoyment. Some parts of it appear as if they're completely made up, parts of fiction. Events throughout history are generally broken up into stories to make them easier to understand, and to simplify often complex subjects. A story can be a tool to help others learn. It can be a source of huge amounts of information. Information that can help shape a person's understanding of the world in new ways. Now, what, if anything, a person takes from a story is fully up to them. History is full of both facts and fiction, and similar to any other story, once out there, it's up to interpretation. The big difference between a story from history, however, is that unlike most stories that once complete remain unchanged, a story from history is almost always changing. Each retelling sees details changing, rearranged, or presented in a new light, so that one person may not even recognize the story they once knew. One of the biggest elements of every story are the characters. History is full of them, to the point that so many interesting and great individuals are overshadowed by the most famous. The biggest names cast the longest shadows. What's great about history, however, is that there's always a way to dig deeper, to get past the most well-known or easily discoverable elements until you reach things that most people have no idea about, or just not central to the usual narrative around the subject. You can dig so deep that the facts that you begin to discover may not even have a great impact on the world or your understanding of it. But those facts can still be interesting. I recently watched a YouTube video titled The Bob Emergency, a study of athletes named Bob. I don't particularly pay attention to sports, and this was a channel I've never seen before. At one point in the video, however, he takes a moment to look at a man named Bob Cyclone from Florida, a boxer who lost a total of 13 matches and never once won in his short boxing career that took place in 1952-53. According to the narrator, he could find nothing about Bob Cyclone other than a few newspapers that confirmed his losses. The entire rest of his life will likely forever remain unknown. But he managed to do what so many have not. He left a mark on history, insignificant as it is, that's still there. He'll be remembered, even if just briefly, by anyone who watches that video, of which there, at the time of making this video, numbers around 1.8 million views. Out of a video full of interesting facts about very interesting people, the person I'll remember best, ironically, is one of the Bobs with the least impact, the least achievements, Bob Cyclone. Personally, I love history because it lets people be remembered. Even if they did not achieve anything great or grand, they still can be remembered. History tells epic stories of people, what they accomplished and where they failed. It paints a complex picture where there's always more to discover. No one's perfect, and it's through history that a person can look back and try to understand why people did what they did, what influenced their actions, and in the end were their actions the correct one in the context that they were made. At the end of the day, history matters because we make it matter. It's a never-ending source of fascination for many, ignored by some. But in the end, it marches forever onwards. It's not just numbers on a page or in an old dusty book. It's people's lives, waiting to be discovered.